Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Portobello Bookshop here in Edinburgh, where we are with the very wonderful Louise Welsh, who is celebrating the publication of The Second Cut. Welcome, Louise.
Thank you so much, and it's brilliant just to be back in a bookshop with people, with other readers. It's brilliant.
Louise, for those of you who don't know, is the award-winning author of 8 novels, The Cutting Room, which was extraordinarily enough her debut 20 years ago, won the Crime Writers Association John Creasy Dagger and the Salter First Book of the Year Award. She is Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Glasgow and an all-round good egg. And we are here today to talk about The Second Cut. I would very much like it if you would give us a little intro and perhaps a reading.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do that. So if I wander off into different climes, it's just because I'm so happy to be here. As Paula said, this is a sequel to a book that I wrote 20 years ago, which, you know, time is strange, isn't it? Time is an instant and time is forever as well. So it doesn't feel like 20 years whatsoever. And I've noticed that the reviews have all said, Rilke is older but no wiser. And they're wrong, because although it's 20 years, and although he has a consciousness of the past, and he remembers 20 years ago, actually he's only aged 3 years with the magic of literature. Because he was 45, I think, when it started, which seemed quite old to me at that point. And there's many, many vigorous 70-year-olds, but I thought I didn't want to make him, you know, I still wanted him to be, because maybe I could get another book if I don't age him. A lot has happened, of course, in 20 years, and this is a book that has a strong LGBTQ plus consciousness, and we might talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to start this book with a really positive, upbeat image and the recognition that queer lives and queer relationships are as enduring as any other person's or any other couple. So I wanted to start it with an equal marriage. So I'll stand up, and you can still see me in the ether. Some things change. Some things never change. The grooms were about to cut the cake when I caught sight of Jojo lurching through the wedding guests, a bashed-up puppet on badly mended strings, head nodding, knees loose. I raised my 3rd glass of fizz to my lips and kept my eyes on the grooms, hoping Jojo would take the hint and piss off. But there was no escaping Jojo. He waved a hand and made a beeline for me with an urgency that suggested the streets beyond the Glasgow Art Club were teeming with military insurgents or zombies on a spree. Jojo was out of breath and wheezing whiskey by the time he got to my side. He put a hand on my shoulder. Christ, there should be a limit on how many tartans are allowed in one room. The 2 bobbies had gone for a traditional theme. The art club looked like a boozy gathering of clan prodigals made good, an oversweet whiskey liqueur advert of plaid and heather, gillybrogues and fluffed-up sporrans. Bobby McAndrew had gone full Bonnie Prince Charlie with a lace jabot and cuffs. Bobby Burns had settled on a bow tie and the same tartan as his kilt. I was in no position to judge. The bobbies had been good to me, and I was showing my respect by wearing a Harris tweed jacket and black quatch trews. I whispered, "Glad to see you're doing your bit for sobriety." Jojo was a tartan-free zone. He was wearing a rumpled black suit over a white shirt. His funeral tie was loosely knotted around his neck. It might have been part of a Reservoir Dogs style decision, or the only tie he could find. Or maybe it was his own funeral Jojo was anticipating. His skin was grey, the bags under his eyes a blue-black cascade. Jojo propped himself against the wall, sending an oil painting skew whiff. The naked woman in the picture had been admiring herself in a handheld silver mirror when someone, the painter presumably, had interrupted her. She was half turned to face the intruder, revealing the full stretch of her bare back. The painter had paid special attention to her spine, the ridge of vertebrae beneath her skin that led down to a hint of cleft. The painting invited you to imagine what happened next, fight or fuck. Jojo turned to see what he was leaning against and snorted, bare-arsed an expression like butter wouldn't melt. The Bobbies had given speeches testifying their love for each other. Now they were fiddling with the 2 plastic grooms from the top of the cake, amusing their guests by casting aspersions on the white fondant icing. There were no parents of the grooms in attendance. Bobby McAndrew's wee mammy, as he always called her, had passed away 6 months before, and Bobby Burns's relatives fell into the never-to-be-mentioned category. Bobby McAndrew gave me a stern look, and I nodded, trying to convey that I would keep Jojo in order. Bobby Burns put his arm around his new husband and called the assembled guests his chosen family. Equal weddings, surrogates, gay community, queer allies, trans rights, drag queens spilling the tea on primetime TV. The world changes. The world stays the same.
Thanks so much for that. That was wonderful, and just a great example of your gorgeous writing and how funny you are, while also steering us towards darker things. This book has been called Richly Layered, Gloriously Carnal and Irresistibly Seductive. I think that was a wonderful introduction. And an introduction, the narrator there is the protagonist, Booker, who we first met, as you said, 20 years ago. I was just wondering, what made you go back to him? What made you go back to him now? Have you been longing to go back to him?
No, I don't think I'd been longing to do it. I think actually, I'd been invited a few times to write a sequel to The Cutting Room, and it was a book that was really close to my heart. It was a book that changed my life. You know, that book, that first book really changed everything for me. And I think I had this feeling that I didn't want to spoil it. You know, it was a book that I'd enjoyed writing. It meant a lot to me, and I would still get letters from people saying that it meant something to them. And then, I don't know, I think there was a nice moment partly at the Saltire Awards. You mentioned that this got a first book Saltire Award 20 years ago, and then they did a sort of, what would you call it, a 30th anniversary of the first Saltire Awards, and this was put forward, and it got the popular vote. It won this thing, and then I met Frances who, from Canongate there, and Frances was saying, you should think about this. And I was thinking about it, but what I was thinking is, in 20 years, a lot has changed. Mm-hmm. A huge amount has changed. And actually, there were new things to be said. So it was, this book was written at the time of the Keep the Clause campaign, the campaign to keep Clause 28, which, as most of you will know, was against any kind of discussion of queer lives, queer sexuality in schools and elsewhere. And as I was writing the first book, The Cutting Room, I would step out of my house and I would see these huge posters put up there, sponsored by Mr. Sutter, who was against, this thing being rescinded. And I would be on my way to get one of his buses, by the way, because he had the monopoly on the buses. You had to get his bus. And there would be these huge posters that would say things like, I support the clause because I am a father. You know, this real allying of paedophilia and, that old fallacy. And so I think there was a great deal of anger that went into that book. And I thought that a lot has changed. We have equal marriage that we began with. There's a consciousness of hate crimes. There's a change in attitude in a lot of people, and you don't want to be complacent about that. Things can change in both directions. And the antiques trade has changed as well. I could say new things about that. I felt that I was ready to go back.
Yeah, because I was wondering about that. There are some things that sort of locate this novel very, very much in the here and now. It takes place in the wake of the pandemic. There are other references. At one point, you talk about somebody Marie Kondoing their flat, I think. But I think one of the things I loved, and I'm sure Cutting Room fans will all love, is that sense of going back to a place that you know from before and seeing it afresh and seeing all those things that have changed, what has changed and what has remained the same. And I wondered how hard that was for you to sit there and think, which places are the same, what streets are different, what sort of areas are like hip now that weren't then, or where is everyone going? Was that a thing you could do easily?
Well, yeah, I mean, as you know, writing is never easy. It's always you want it to feel like you just, but there's always an element. There's moments of slog and there's moments of hitting a wall. But that aspect of it, the place, I think, did come quite easily because it's a place that I know, and I live in the city of Glasgow. I've lived there on and off for a long time. And so those changes are part of my consciousness. And that is one of the delights, actually, of being a little bit older, is that you know the place better and you know the history of the place. And you can walk along streets and you see the street, but you see the history of the street. And sometimes you remember what was there before, what's missing, what's better. And this is Rilke's consciousness, not mine, but I could feed that into it. And I have to look at it through Rilke's vision. And Rilke is a man, Rilke and Rose, they both work in an auction house. They know the texture of things. They know the provenance of things. So there's other characters that I've written couldn't tell you the fabric of everything. They don't know the fabric of everything, but Rilke and Rose know the fabric of stuff, and they know its history, and that's just a delight, you know. They have all this information, and I can put some of that in. Yeah,
because you do. I mean, you're kind of known for this, for evoking sense of place so brilliantly. But it's a very distinctive, it's a very particular Glasgow. It's not just any Glasgow. This is Rilke's Glasgow that you take us through, isn't it?
Yeah, it is his Glasgow. And he's, you know, as writers, in a way, our job is also to get into the back room, isn't it? You're meant to get into the back room of everything in your city, whether that's the back room in the corner shop or the back room in the city chambers, you know, the back room in the picture house, the back room in the theatre, all of these places. My aim is to get into the back room at some point, you know. I'm always delighted to go in the back room downstairs, by the way, and see see the lost property bit with the wee dolly and stuff, you know. Yes, but it's Rilke's vision. So what is he interested in, and where does he want to go, and the rhythm of his voice, and of course the quest also that he's on.
Yeah. And can we talk a bit about Rilke? We have to talk a bit about Rilke because he's such a fascinating character and not at all the sort of traditional crime protagonist. He's not a hero. He does not aspire to heroism. He's I think you've said this before, that, you know, in older times, he might have been more suited to being the villain or the victim. He's that sort of man, isn't he?
I think that's the sexuality aspect. So previously, you know, the crime genre is such a fascinating and exciting genre, and it has, I guess, parameters and conventions that we can go with, that we can go against. And the idea of, I don't know, often within crime novels, when you spotted the queer person, when you spotted the person who's not from around here, the person with the limp. I think there's a John le Carré novel, a very early one, where a man drinks from a china teacup, and you think, oh, it was him. It was definitely him. You know, but as other writers have shown us, you know, we're lucky we've got Val McDermid in the audience in the Lindsay Gordon books. We have a queer protagonist, queer heroine, hero, you know, at the centre of this book. And so these ideas that we can turn things around, and we can have Rilke, a gay man who has, as Philip Marlowe has, his own moral code. In some way, it's quite classic. He goes through the city. His code may not be everybody's code, but really he's a decent guy. He doesn't, you know, when the pandemic comes along, Rilke doesn't think, oh, you know what? I could start making some money out of dodgy PPE. He doesn't think that. He doesn't think, oh, I could do something here. He just tries to do the best that he can. And we suspect he might have broken lockdown a few times, but he's not, you know, He's not held a party in the auction house.
Yeah, he's not amoral. He says, I do think at one point he says, illegality I can cope with, cruelty I can't.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference. And I think, you know, I guess within the crime novel, the noir novel, the detective novel, you do have different types, don't you? So in some novels, there might be a police procedural aspect. I'm thinking about the Martin Beck novels. We want to solve the crime from the police's perspective. With Rilke's novels, he's interested in a different type of justice, I suppose. He's interested in some more the Chester Himes kind of, okay, well, we might not be sticking to the law, but we're sticking to the natural justice.
And so I'm not going to, obviously we're not going to give away the plot, but Rilke in this novel is clearing a house in Galloway, which he's very rude about, by the way. We'll talk about his dislike of the countryside. He's going to suspect that there are unsavoury things going on. There's car accidents, there are deaths of both man and beast and all sorts of things. There's a suspicion of abuses being perpetrated by respectable folk, isn't there? And I think this is something that I find in your work, that there's something about the veneer of respectability that wealth confers, and sort of you like to sort of poke at that and expose the hypocrisy of that, don't you?
I guess, yeah, I suppose for Rilke in previous times, he would have been somebody that people would look at and they would judge and they'd think, oh, you're a bad person, you're a bad guy. But, you know, I suppose it's the old Jekyll and Hyde aspect, the Robert Louis Stevenson idea of what lies behind these respectable doors. And I think in the first book, Rilke quotes this proverb, you know, if you're rich, you're either a thief or the son of a thief. And, you know, when you go past these great big houses, sometimes you think, where did the money come from? You know, and that's questions that perhaps we don't ask often enough. These wealthy, respectable institutions and the people that run them, where did the money come from, you know? And do we think less of people for not having economic wealth? So yeah, I guess, I mean, the rich are an easy target, aren't they, really? But there's a thread of anti-capitalism, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, because you are asking a bit where the money comes from, aren't you? And not just the money they might have now, but where the family's wealth comes from. You're sort of drawing parallels, aren't you, between what might be going on now and between colonialism or empire or what have you.
Yeah, and these things are very joined up, you know, if you think of them holistically. And I suppose we're thinking a lot more now about the North Atlantic slave trade, profits from that really, you know, iniquitous, organised, legal at the time trade in people as well as goods, and the knowledge. You know, it's a very, very short time away. So, and on May Day, I often post a short film of Paul Robeson leading a May Day parade through Glasgow. Paul Robeson was the son of an enslaved people. There are people in the city who still remember shaking hands with him. That is how close we are, you know, to that particular legal, at the time, though completely immoral trade. And we know that when it was ceased, that the people who owned these enslaved people were compensated hugely compensated, and that we still have people in our government who benefited from that and who are not at all inclined to give the money back. They regret it very much.
Just not enough.
And they're not going to give it back. And, you know, and also, I guess, that might come across as rather smug because, of course, we are part of this society. We benefit in all sorts of different ways. So I guess the consciousness of the built environment that Rilke has as a man who's lived in this city for a long time and who knows his history, he knows that there's blood in the mortar. And when he looks at the buildings, he sees the buildings and he sees perhaps where they came from too.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I want to talk to you a bit about trouble and the sense of embracing chaos, because it seemed to me that there was a celebration, or at least a respect, for people who take risks. I think Rilke, you say, has never cared too much for caution. And there's a lovely line about the imp of the perverse, which has ruled his life. But he isn't the only one. That you've got this whole cast of characters, Jojo, Sans, Rose, the whole lot of them, who kind of don't like to live on the safe side.
So it's more, isn't it? They can't. They just can't. It's not in their nature. They're compelled somehow to take that extra step and to push things too far. Just, you know, that thing that you think, I wonder what would happen if I did this? What happens if I press that button? Oh. So yeah, and I think there's also energy and fun and a consciousness that this is one life. You know, and I guess that consciousness can make you cautious, as it has me during the pandemic. You know, I stuck to the rules, I stuck to lockdown, all of these things. And then there are moments when you just think, you know what, I'm just going to step off now, step off the ledge. What did Deacon Brodie, when he steps off the gallows, he says, what is it but a step in the dark? You know, I often think of that. So Rilke, and also there's the economic imperative too. Yeah. So they have to make some money. And, you know, there's that, you have to make some money, and that makes them a bit reckless sometimes too. Yeah.
So I think you've kind of answered this question a bit. You were saying you were very law-abiding during the pandemic, but I wondered whether you felt we'd all become maybe a little bit too cautious. I read an interview with Sarah Moss, who's also written a pandemic novel, and she talked about how she was slightly taken aback by how easily supposedly rebellious people were happy to sort of cede their freedoms to this government. Has that been something that sort of made you feel uneasy, or?
The government makes me feel the government makes me feel hugely uneasy. I think, what is it that gives us hope? And what gives us hope is love. And I think that's often the reason why people were cautious. Yeah. They weren't cautious for themselves. They were cautious for their relative or somebody that they were connected with that they didn't want to bring this disease back to. So I think when we may live in an individualistic society, but actually we're all connected. And I think that's why we obeyed the rules such as they were. And I guess now that we have testing, now that we have these things, people will be measuring their risks for themselves. And, you know, and that leads different challenges. It's not like we were told to stay in because, you know, for no reason. I'm quite impressed, actually. And I was really impressed by all of the people at Christmas time who had tested positive and who said, oh, well, I can't go then. I'm going to have to stay at home because I don't want to infect somebody else. And I thought nobody's going to give any of these people a medal. But I thought it was pretty heroic, actually, that people did that. Yeah,
there may have been some of them who were quite happy to duck out of family Christmas Day. I'm not going to talk too much more about the pandemic because I think we're all sick of it. But I did wonder, particularly for you, how it was to write about the aftermath of a real pandemic, having written 3 books about a fictional one, because Louise, if you don't know this, wrote a plague trilogy before the pandemic.
Yeah.
That must have been weird.
When I first wrote it, I went over to North America to do some events, and there was a big Ebola thing happening in different parts of Africa. And every event I did in North America, someone would say, I must be really pleased that it's so toxic. No, I'm not pleased. But I think these books were really about, in a way, about economics. They were adventure stories that were about economics and about, differences in resources and what happens when this kind of thing happens. So I guess I was surprised. I mean, I did think it's a rubbish virus that kills off the host, isn't it? You know, I'd always comforted myself with that thought. But I guess the idea that the rich got richer, the poor got poorer, the gaps in, became wider, that wasn't surprising, sadly.
No, of course. I wondered if you could talk a bit about generational conflict, because I felt there was quite a lot of that going on in this book. There's a glorious confrontation between Les, who's more of Rilke's generation, and two sort of gender non-binary kids that he meets at a protest. And it's all about the way people speak and the way they identify, and they're on the same side, really. But there's generations rubbing up against each other. And there is a sense of people getting on a bit. I mean, you've said Rilke hasn't aged that much, but he's feeling his age, isn't he?
Yeah, he is feeling his age, and he gets turned down at one point by somebody, and there's a guy in a taxi cab who makes an advance at him, and Rilke says, who doesn't take him up, and he's like, well, no one's going to want to fuck you soon, Grandad, so you should have taken me up on it. I guess Rilke and Les, they're not up on the nuances of identity. We say identity politics, don't we? But it's not necessarily politics, it's just identity and more nuanced identities. And Rilke and Les are not up on this. They're blokes that I don't think they're particularly interested in it, actually. Yeah. They don't know the language. They're blokes that have taken their beatings, given some beatings, I suppose, because of their sexuality. And I think for Les, he's irked. He's irked by these young people that have this whole new language and this whole new code. And it just irks him a wee bit. And there's they talk about how they identify. And he says, well, I identify as a tranny. And they say, well, you should love yourself more. And he's like, I love myself fine. But, I suppose that idea of different language, is it like this? Or can we just be like, so it's a moment of comedy and satire, I hope.
I think you were very good at poking fun at both sides. I mean, I wonder if you had sometimes, if you saw it from both sides yourself. Whether there was one party you were sympathetic
I don't like to think of things as being sides, I think.
I
think actually that, I think sometimes we look at the internet and we get an idea that things are bizarrely binary, and they're not at all binary, that actually there's much more getting on and discussion and exchange of opinion and ideas than one would think from media and internet. And so I suppose, it's a little bit of fun, but I hope that the younger folk and the older folk all come out okay out of it, actually. Yeah. And the youngsters are pretty cute, they're pretty savvy, and the older guys are just a bit, they're trying to catch, maybe they're not trying to catch up, actually.
I realise we're talking a lot about issues, because I do feel your books are quite political without you being on a soapbox, but it feels like you have your finger on the pulse. But that aside, there is this quite many intricate plots going on in this novel, aren't they? And I was wondering, from a crime writer's perspective, sort of how much of that in advance, how much you plotted out, sort of where it came from, why these particular plots. That's a lot of questions in one. But are you one of those people who kind of knows from the beginning, or did you just sort of feel your way around it?
Yeah, a little bit of both. So there's several plots going on here. Jojo, who we met very briefly at the beginning, Jojo's very quickly dispatched, and the police aren't particularly interested. He's a older drug user who drinks too much, and it's a very cold night, and he is found on a doorstep, passed away. They're like, fine, that's nothing to see here, kind of thing. And Rilke thinks there might be more going on, and then there's the house and garden. So there's a lot. There are several plots that hopefully come together, I hope. So some of them more than the other, and I guess there's something about the rhythm of that as well, and the logic of that, and how you connect them, and how you connect your cast.
And you're one of those writers, I really like this, that you don't necessarily tie everything up into neat little bows. You leave quite a lot of space, don't you, for the reader to sort of wonder.
Yeah, everybody's asked me who killed the dog. And I thought it was obvious, but now I need to put a little coda in at the end who killed the dog. But yeah, I think life, you know, we know this, life isn't neat. But I think what I hope is that there's enough there that the reader will have their idea of what happened. And I like this in theatre as well, actually. You know, when you go to the theatre, you go to write for opera or something, my desire in those moments, I always want an interval, because I think they're the best bits. But I also want people in the interval to be saying, oh, what do you think is going to happen next? Oh, I think they did that. Yeah. No, I think this. And I want there to be enough complexity of character there that in the end, when people leave, they might be kind of disagreeing with each other about who was right and who was wrong. And if they hadn't done this, then that would never have happened. Oh, but if he hadn't done that, you know. So I like that idea that you have a world that in the end is complex enough for people who engage with it to make their own world from it too.
Absolutely, and they're the sorts of books I think that you want to go back and read again just to make sure that were you right? Was I right? Was he right? You know, you want to go back and investigate a little bit further. You have been called a literary crime writer. I was wondering if that was a label that you liked, or whether you thought of yourself as just a literary fiction writer, or just a crime writer, or none of the above.
I like the crime writer.
Oh, right.
I love being called a crime writer. And I think, I mean, really, you're just happy if people aren't calling you rude names most of the time. But yeah, but sometimes people will say, oh, the crime writer thing. No, I think it's fun. And these are the books that I read as a child, you know, the books that you found not on the shelf, but in the carousel at Bobby's bookshop, and the books with the great covers, you know, and the books that when you took them out, the librarian would say to your parent, are they allowed to have this book? You know, that's what you want. You want a lurid cover. The
ones where you could, like, there were bullet holes and you could open the cover and then there was something else underneath.
And then there was a naked lady hidden behind on the front. all of those things. And the picture where there's a gun and a rose and a half-drunk glass of whiskey with lipstick on it. All of those things.
Yeah.
Also, I think crime writers might sell more books than literary writers.
Just possibly. But you have actually written in a lot of different genres. You've written historical fiction, Tamburlaine Must Die, dystopian speculative, The Plague Ones. Naming the Bones felt very gothic, didn't it? The Girl on the Stairs was more sort of psychological thriller. I was wondering if there was any one that you sort of felt most at home, or indeed whether you want to try something completely different, or, you know.
I love the gothic. You know, I think the gothic and the crime go so well together, and I think they deal with the elemental. You know, they come from here. You know, they come from the guts as well as the heart, and they deal with our fears. I think, you know, when you talk about the origins of the crime novel, it must just go back to folk tales, really. You know, the idea of these must be the first stories ever told about justice, about fear, about all of those things. But yeah, I think that marrying between the genres is rather easy to do. It's such a huge umbrella. But yeah, I do like the gothic. I like the dark corners. There's an awful lot of rain in my books. It rains, rains all the time. The sun comes out towards the end.
Yeah. I know you also have written opera. And I was wondering whether you would ever... Have you written screenplays? Would you write screenplays? Would you adapt these books? Would you be interested in that?
I love the movies so much. I really love going to the movies. And The Girl on the Stairs was something that I'd kind of conceived as a film And then I spoke to my agent, and they're like, we can't get, you have no track record in film. Why don't you try and write it as a book? And then maybe, who knows? And it's the only book that's never been optioned for film. But yeah, everything's been optioned. Nothing's ever made the big or the small screen. I think you've got to really, really want to do it because there's a lot of heartbreak and a lot of time spent on that genre. And I think I always feel the clock's ticking a little bit. And if I were doing that, then I wouldn't be writing a book.
Yeah.
But I love the movies.
Yeah. Rilke would make such a great screen character, wouldn't he?
It's got very close quite a few times, and then whoever's been doing it has always come to there's always a point when they go, oh, it's a bit dark, isn't it? It was as dark when you picked it up the first time. So I guess you'd want it to be done well, and that's the other thing, yeah.
Yes. Indeed. Sands, who's the young artist in this book, says that an artist shouldn't run away from experience. I wondered if that was your belief.
Gosh, it depends what experience, doesn't it? Because, for Sands is a very young visual artist. And I think there's also I guess something else that I'm interested in is that idea of the romantic artist, and that comes very much into Tamburlaine Must Die, which is the second book I did, the historical fiction. And that idea of the young artist being half in love with easeful death, it's a very, very dangerous thing, and I work a lot with young writers, and you squash that, because no, not entirely, but you don't want people mucking about with that idea of, death is so attractive. Yes, it is, and then you're not there, But I think Sands has a little bit of that about him. He has an idea of the romantic artist and what the artist should be, and he's not quite found himself yet. So he's embracing experience, and yeah.
And where did these... Well, we'll go back to Rilke. Where did Rilke come from originally? Is he just purely imagination?
I think, I worked, for a long time, I worked as a second-hand bookseller, and I went to a lot of auction houses. I went to a lot of markets. I went to a lot of jumble sales. I bought from people's houses. You covered a lot, and it was a fantastic experience, and you got to meet a lot of people. And so Rilke came out of those shelves and those auction houses and those second-hand things. And there's a lot of waiting around when you do these things as well, and there's a lot to look at. And an auction is, at its very best, it is a stage show. Everything comes together, everything goes up. We're all there, we're all participating, and then 2 days later, it's all gone. And then something new comes in, the new stuff arrives, and there's that huge excitement if you don't know what it's going to be, and sometimes we would buy boxes blind at the auction. You'd just be like, that is really cheap. There must be, all that costs is my labour, shifting all this stuff. There must be something in there we can use. So I guess, there's bits of different visions, but in the end, I think his own voice.
That just reminded me there is the most wonderful description of an auction in this book, which I should have got you to read that, but I think we now have probably a little bit of time for questions, I think, which, yes? Okay. If you have a question, raise your hand and Ewan will come along with the microphone. I think you've probably already been told this.
While you have a think about it in the room, we've got one from Linda on the live stream. And Linda says, how about Rilke the opera?
Oh, that's such a nice question. I just can't see it. I can't see it myself, and I think there's a thing about stories and characters that sometimes they demand a particular medium. So sometimes you have a story and you think, but this isn't a book. This would work as a play, or this would work as an opera, if you're lucky. And opera is very difficult to get off the ground because it costs you have to convince people to spend money on it. So I can't see Rilke the opera, because I think it would, involve him being too much to the fore and he likes to be in the dark. But a movie, yes.
We do have a slow start to questions online, so if anyone in the room has one now to keep us going, that would be wonderful. But I'm sure some more will come in, so if there's, yeah?
Thanks, Doug.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned your, all the different genres that you've written in, you're very genre fluid. Is there any other genres that you haven't tried yet that you'd like to have a go at?
Oh, goodness. You know, it's more like I'd like to go back to, because I'd love to do another opera. You know, I'd really love to do another opera. And a friend, Stuart McRae, the composer that I work with, we've been working on developing something, and I would love to get that out in the world. Yes, I think that's the thing that I would like to do. I'd like to go back to the stage in some way. And part of that is because it's really, really good fun. You know, and it's just amazing to work with, you get to work with singers and to work with directors and costume people. They don't let me work with the orchestra. Stuart works with the orchestra. But I get to sit back and watch him working with the orchestra. And so all of that, I think that's just such a brilliant and stimulating endeavour. And then at the very end, you know, so all these things, they start off with an idea and with two people, and then they end up with a theatre with kind of everybody backstage and the costumes and everything and everybody in their seats. It's just is kind of amazing to experience all of that. I shake like this, and I hold Stuart's hand. Get off. No, I just love it. So I would like to go, I think, return to that.
We have got a question from Joanna online, who asks, who would you love to see playing Rilke in your movie?
Oh my God. It's a really strange one that, Alan Cumming did the audiobook, and when I heard that he was going to do has done the audiobook, I should say, and when I heard he was doing the audiobook, and I've listened to bits of it, and it just sounds brilliant, I was thinking, oh. Yeah, but I think, you know, I think that's the brilliant thing about film sometimes, isn't it? That you can't envisage it, and then you see somebody, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. So, yeah, but I certainly think he's made a fantastic job of the audiobook, and he does have the right. He's a little bit too good looking, but they could probably do something to make him look.
I always think, like, well, I know he's not Scottish, but Rilke has a bit of a Nick Cave kind of vibe, doesn't he?
Yes.
That slightly vampiric thing.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah.
He could probably do Scottish.
I think that it's a couple of years now, well, more than that now, you've been a professor of creative writing at Glasgow. What has changed about your practice and the way that you write as a result of that kind of work, that kind of teaching and working with lots of different writers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think I don't know that much has changed. I think I've got more. I teach or I facilitate a crime writing module, and I think that's made me think more about the different structures, and I think that's quite useful actually to have a consciousness of those structures. So what is the difference between a historical crime novel? What are the demands of hard-boiled fiction, and how do they interact with each other? So I think that consciousness is quite good, and that demand of reading backwards in the genre as well as forwards, I think, is quite useful for me. I think the thing that has given me most of all, though, is sort of fun, which I don't think your job is meant to do, but you get to meet a lot of people, and I think meeting a lot of people and staying engaged in that way, meeting people from around the world. And the other thing that it's given me, of course, is different stories, because everything that you do, you get a new story, and that consciousness of how great big institutions work, which I wouldn't say that I've cracked entirely how a huge institution like the university works, but you get that, that idea and I'm in the process of finishing a campus crime novel, perhaps. So that's I've more or less finished that. So that kind of thing, new stories, new people. And the other thing it's given me is this big chocolate box of experts, because, which is what a writer really benefits from. So when you get a little bit stuck, you look in the you look on the website and you think, oh, I know who to ask. And if you ask nicely, people tell you things that it took them decades to learn. People are very, very generous with their knowledge. Yeah, but mainly fun.
We've got a question from Molly who asks, would you want to write a third book relating to Rilke, featuring Rilke?
I probably won't make 20 years now. I think I would like to write a good story for him. So I think it's that. I think it's when you write something, you've got to really want to do it with your heart, And prior to this one, I hadn't had that sort of heartfelt desire, but I had a great deal of fun being in Rilke's world. And I liked re-engaging with it, and I liked thinking about the things that had changed. So I think I would like to revisit it. And I think just to make sure that I had, and also to make sure it's not silly, because why is this antique dealer coming? Miss Marple did it all the time, but you don't want to have an auctioneer that it's not Lovejoy, Ian McShane did a really fantastic job of that. But I think I could see one more. I could imagine one more. And I've always really admired Patricia Highsmith. I think, did she do 4 Ripley's? Is it 4 that she did? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, I like, but 3 seems a strong structure.
Any other questions in the room? Yes, I'm coming. Walking sounds for those at home.
Hi, Louise. One of the great pleasures of the second cut is the character of Glasgow, which has a kind of Rilke-like presence, cadaverous at times and derelict at times, and sort of coming through, but sort of soldiering on. And I feel there was almost more of Glasgow in the second cut than in the cutting room. And I was just interested, I suppose, what drew you to writing so much about buildings in a crime novel?
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I don't know. Because, of course, I didn't go back and read the cutting room before I wrote this one. I just dived right in. And so I forget that it doesn't have so much of the buildings. I don't know. I think there's that idea of somebody traversing the city, being in the city, being a part of the city, being out with the city at the same time. Or maybe I have just become more interested in the fabric of these buildings. But there's something about the rhythm of that and that idea, the city of the dreadful night. And perhaps there was that sense during lockdown as well of the city emerging without the people in it as well, which is something very poignant for me, and I'm sure for other people when you went into town, whatever your town is, and there wasn't people there, it felt very sad, didn't it? So maybe some of that poignancy that I felt has come through a little bit. I don't know.
And you are unmistakably a city dweller. Well, I'm ascribing things to you, but you were so mean about the countryside. Do you hate the countryside, Louise?
I love the countryside, actually. Zoe and I have a caravan. This will surprise some of you. Yeah. We have a static caravan on the South Ayrshire coast that we go to an hour, 10 minutes from our house. We can see the sea. We can get to the sea in 2 minutes. But I know I don't have what it takes to live in the countryside. I know I don't have what it takes. I certainly don't have what it takes to live on an island. I love going to the Hebrides. I love going to islands. But, I need to... Rilke says he needs to be where someone will hear him scream. And I feel a bit that way. I don't even take milk in my tea, but I feel it would be a disaster if I couldn't go out at 11 o'clock for a pint of milk, you know. I am a city dweller. Yeah, I'm a city person.
But I mean, I love the countryside, but I really identified with that thing about people not being able to hear you scream, because there's something really threatening for city dwellers about being in the countryside, isn't there? I think it's that sort of in cold blood, isolated,
Yes,
you know,
yeah.
bad things can happen here.
Yeah, when I hear somebody screaming outside, and I know that it's just someone
It's
screaming.
just drunk people.
But I don't. Maybe I'm just not self-sufficient enough. You know, if you live in a remote area, I mean, remote from other people, you have to be able to cope with all of that. But I think there's also a loss of anonymity in the countryside. You know, and there's a more anonymity within the city as well. And I think for Rilke, that anonymity and that ability to choose who he's going to interact with, you know, to choose who his friends are, or to choose, you know, what compadres he's going to have. And within the countryside, you have to be ready to support each other, because there may be moments when, you know, things break down and you need your friends to come and help you out. I'm not into that, really.
We have got another question from the live stream audience. This is from Sarah. And Sarah asks, was writing with the pandemic in the novel in any way cathartic or helpful to you when you yourself were living through the pandemic?
It's a good question, because when the pandemic started, like a lot of people I imagine here, I found it difficult even to read. You know, and reading is one of my favourite things to do. And I found I hardly had the focus to read, because we all had this anxiety and this lack of knowledge of what would happen next, and people we were worried about. And I got back into reading through listening to David Sedaris on audiobooks and then reading stories. So, yeah, I think being able to escape into another world is actually always comforting. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about writing, that you have this rhythm to your life, and you're working on something that is hopefully utterly absorbing, and it absorbs you in the way that I imagine people who make things with their hands or who work in music, or, you know, it was comforting to have that. And I was very lucky, you know, I've been making jokes about the countryside, but although I live in the centre of the city, I live in a very green centre of the city, and we have a community garden and things. So that was a great support as well. But yeah, being able to go somewhere else in my mind when we could only go 5 miles around. Maybe that's why Rilke walks through the city so much, because we were limited in where we could travel.
Excellent. Any more questions in the room at all? Yeah?
It's not so much a question.
Okay.
You were saying that when the pandemic started, you couldn't read.
If you hold on 1 second, just our audience at home will hear it as well. I'll let you speak into that.
Sorry, you said that at the start of the pandemic you couldn't read. Unfortunately, I went the opposite.
Oh, okay.
And I picked up every pandemic book that I could ever find. In fact, I've got your Byrne book. I've got the series.
Oh,
Val McDermott, I've got Her Resistance. I just went completely Stephen King, The Stand. I just had to read to find out what everybody else
what they were doing, yeah.
I enjoyed them.
Oh, good. Apparently sales of pandemic books went up. You know, so lots of people were doing the same thing, having this fictional exploration.
Yes.
Time perhaps for one last question, and it's a great one from the live stream viewer, Michelle. What would be your desert island book?
Yeah, I heard that the person that was on Desert Island Books this week chose How to Live on a Desert Island. He chose a really practical book, but I wouldn't choose that. I'd probably go back to childhood. I would like the complete works of Robert Louis Stevenson. I'd go back, to that moment when I first was read to, not even reading, but being read to, and discovered that actually literature can make you feel really afraid, and that visceral quality. So I think there would be several comforts there, because there would be the comfort of returning to a book in childhood. There'd be the comfort at points of returning to Scotland to Edinburgh. There'd be the comfort of the South Seas if it was a tropical island, and also the really, really good, stylish prose, the clean writing of Stevenson. Yeah, that would be completely absorbing, and it'd be quite big as well if I could have because although he died young, he had a huge amount of. He created a huge amount, and I think also that at heart, Stevenson always strikes me as a humanitarian and as an anti-colonialist before we had coined the phrase. So.
We would, of course, this evening recommend everyone's Desert Island book to be The Second Cut by Louise Welsh. Now, Paula, if you'd like to wrap things up for us, that would be wonderful. That's us at
I
time.
would just like to say thank you so much
thank
to
you,
Louise for a
Paula. Thank you very
wonderful,
much.
wonderful introduction to her very, very brilliant novel. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you
very
everyone
much.
for coming.
Thank you to Portobello
you.
Books as well
Thank
for
you,
hosting us.
Portobello.
Thank you.